Vision 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan, NDP, Update. Performance Report 2009 to 2021. Summary. Prepared by the Vision 2030 Jamaica Secretariat, Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ. Medium-Term Socio-Economic Policy Framework, MTF. The successive 3-year Medium-Term Socio-Economic Policy Framework, MTF, is the centerpiece of the implementation framework for Vision 2030 Jamaica and the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Presenting Planned National Development Results for the long and medium-term national strategies that define the development focus for sectors and subsectors. Policy-driven sector strategies that represent the priorities for medium-term planning and programming aligned to budgetary allocation, alignment of national outcomes and national and sector strategies with the SDGs and SDGs targets. Each MTF comes into effect through cabinet approval, which is accompanied by a directive for ministries, departments and agencies, MDAs, to align their planning and consequently budgetary allocations to the MTF. Local and global partners in development should align their plans, programs, and development financing to the planned national development results, and national and sector strategies in the MTF. The alignment of all development-related plans and actions to the MTF will support a coordinated and coherent implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica and the SDGs. The implementation of the fourth MTF, which covered the period 2018 to 2021, commenced in fiscal year FY 2018-19, the 10th continuous year of the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica. It was also the third year of implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 SDGs. The 2030 Agenda was adopted in September 2015, with implementation commencing in January 2016. The integration of the SDGs in the MTF commenced with MTF 2015 to 2018, which showed the alignment of the 17 SDGs with the national goals and outcomes of Vision 2030 Jamaica. However, MTF 2018 to 2021 would be the first MTF after a roadmap for SDG implementation was approved by the Cabinet in 2017. The roadmap identifies Vision 2030 Jamaica and its MTF as the main mechanism for implementation of the SDGs. The MTF 2018 to 2021 was approved by the Cabinet in March 2019, accompanied by a directive to MDAs to align strategic corporate and operational plans with the MTF. The approval of the MTF also represented an agreed framework for implementation of the SDGs in the medium term. The MTF showed alignment between the national goals and outcomes and the SDGs, as well as the alignment of SDG targets with the national and sector strategies for advancing the planned national development results. Medium-Term Socio-Economic Policy Framework, MTF, 2018 to 2021 covered one of the most globally impactful periods in over a century. For Jamaica, the period 2018 to 2021 represented a situation where crisis and recovery were juxtaposed. This required an acceleration of the country's development efforts towards ensuring greater levels of resilience across all spheres and at all levels of development. This was also the period when Jamaica began to experience the benefits of the sacrifices that commenced under the first MTF, which covered the period FY 2009-10 FY 2011-12 that led to the entrenchment of macroeconomic stability and recovery in some of the areas that experienced the most deleterious losses associated with the 2008 global financial crisis, such as poverty. A global COVID-19 pandemic around the outbreak of the novel coronavirus nCoV was declared by the World Health Organization, WHO, in March 2020, the first month in the first fiscal year of MTF 2018 to 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic depleted development gains. It led to losses owing to vulnerabilities that were previously unchallenged by any major structural disruptions within and across states. These vulnerabilities were demonstrated in several areas, such as capacity for the provision of inclusive, quality technology-based distance learning services at all levels of the education system. The pandemic necessitated revisions to development strategies and a greater focus on sustainability, inclusion, and resilience as key elements of recovery and growth. The development context in which the period covered by MTF 2018 to 2021 concluded was demonstrative of the importance of a review of the national development planning machinery towards promoting evidence-based continuous improvement and greater effectiveness. The development situation also required an assessment of the feasibility of achieving the 2030 targets for Vision 2030 Jamaica and the SDGs, as both are scheduled to conclude in 2030, making the decade to 2030 a pivotal and determinative period. In fact, the United Nations declared the decade to 2030 the decade of action to deliver the SDGs. The Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ, defined the decade as one of review and strengthening of Vision 2030 Jamaica towards accelerated development and planning for beyond 2030. Summary update. Performance Report. Vision 2030 Jamaica FY 2009/10 FY 2020/21 Country Situation, Context, and Performance in Implementing Vision 2030 Jamaica and the SDGs, and Progressing Towards the Goals. Overview. The overarching strategic objective of Vision 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan, NDP, has been to create the conditions necessary for transformational, sustainable and inclusive development towards the achievement of developed country status. In 2009, when the plan was launched, the planned timeline for the achievement of developed country status was from 2009 to 2030. The achievement of developed country status would be reflected in the achievement of 2030 targets aligned to 4 interdependent and synergistic social, economic, and environmental national goals and 15 national outcomes. The achievement of the national goals requires the transformation of social systems, structures and institutions at the national, local and sector levels. Successive governing administrations have advanced legislation, policies and programs towards creating an enabling environment for a whole-of-society approach to achieve these transformative goals. The planned societal transformation is demonstrated in the achievement of long-term development targets for key indicators of sustainability, governance, equity and inclusion. It is also evident in the opportunity structure and the extent to which all citizens have equal access to a high standard of living, particularly in areas such as human capital development, minimum social protection guarantees, safety and security, and asset creation and wealth generation. Jamaica has made noteworthy progress in implementing Vision 2030 Jamaica and advancing the achievement of planned results. However, the efficiency and effectiveness of implementation, and the achievement of planned medium-term results, have been mixed. The lessons learned from implementation and those from the actual results achieved tell different nuanced stories. These stories are equally instructive for charting the way forward and addressing systemic, structural, socio-cultural, and other blockages and bottlenecks to the achievement of social, economic, and environmental development, including stability, resilience, and growth. Performance monitoring data and information in assessing and reporting on performance. The assessment of development performance under Vision 2030 Jamaica includes the monitoring and evaluation of quantitative and qualitative data. The main mechanism for quantitatively measuring national development performance is the National Outcome Indicator (NOI) framework. The National Outcome Indicators, quantitative metrics, are utilized to assess performance in advancing the achievement of medium and long-term targets relating to the national outcomes. The NOI framework includes a baseline year, 2007, and 3-year targets aligned to the conclusion of each MTF. Since MTF 2021 to 2024, an approach of monitoring annual targets, based on the 3-year targets, commenced. 75 national outcome indicators were being monitoring at the end of the reference period covered in this report. The NOI framework includes the disaggregation by age, sex, and/or locale for some indicators. Lessons learned have demonstrated that an important benefit of long-term national development planning is the monitoring and evaluation of trend data, which allows for the assessment of the sustainability and inclusiveness of gains, losses or lack of change over time. Also, data trends inform forecasting and qualitatively provide insight into the type and characteristics of development to expect in the future. An impediment to monitoring of development performance is the typical lag in the availability of the data. There is also no uniformity in the time when data become available. Also, most data are not disseminated based on a published release schedule calendar. Therefore, consistent monitoring of data and dialogue with data producers are necessary to ensure that updates to databases and assessment of performance are made as soon as data become available. This is discussed in further detail in Volume 2 Means of Implementation Report. Using the data available up to March 2022, development gains were made under all 4 goals. This was evidenced by the achievement of some 2018 targets and improvement in some indicators that fell short of targets. Where 2019 and 2020 data were available, some indicators showed progress towards achieving 2021 targets. The development gains can be leveraged to accelerate growth and institutionalize sustainability, inclusion, and multidimensional justice within the growth nexus. On the other hand, there have also been areas of underperformance, fluctuations, and development losses, with some indicators showing slippages or no change from the baseline year, 2007. These development results are important in the compilation of lessons learned. They also serve as critical evidence in formulating more effective development strategies and strengthening capacity and delivery of implementation. For accelerated development, Jamaica's development results based on the national outcome indicators for this report. Data available up to March 2022 was utilized. There has generally been more than a 1-year lag in the availability of data for most indicators. However, owing to the effects of COVID-19, this was lengthened in some instances. Data up to 2018 will be measured against targets set for 2018, and data for 2019 to 2021 will be used to measure progress towards achieving the 2021 targets. Note that data for 2020 and 2021 were not available for most indicators. The assessment of performance presented is therefore against 2018 targets. When performance was measured against the 2018 targets, 63% of indicators showed improvement over the baseline year, 2007, while 33% showed no improvement or worsened relative to the baseline year of 2007. This can be further broken down as follows. 36% of the Vision 2030 Jamaica targets were met or exceeded. 27% of the indicators showed some improvement over the baseline year. 2007 33% of the indicators showed no improvement or worsened compared to the baseline year. 2007 4% of the indicators could not be compared in this way due to a lack of data and or agreed targets for the relevant period. The performance regarding indicators that showed improvement over baseline but did not meet target was disaggregated by those moving in the direction of towards targets and those not moving in the direction of moving away from the target. Of the 27% of indicators with performance recorded in this category, 18% were moving in the direction of the targets and 9% were not moving in the direction of the target. See Figure 2. An assessment of performance by national goal showed that the percentage distribution of indicators showing improvement ranged from a high of 77% for Goal 2 to a low of 51% for Goal 4. See Figures 3 and 4. Development performance and the impact of COVID-19. On the 5th of January, 2020, the World Health Organization, WHO, published its first disease outbreak news on the novel coronavirus nCoV, and by the 30th of January, 2020, the WHO declared COVID-19 a public health emergency of international concern, (PHIEC). In a COVID-19 media briefing on the 11th of March, 2020, the Director General of the WHO declared the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic, a day after the first case was confirmed in Jamaica on the 10th of March, 2020. There was global consensus that the COVID-19 pandemic caught the world off guard as it was largely an unanticipated threat. Accordingly, evidence-based processes for informing public policy and the frameworks for infusing evidence and policy into governance arrangements in the public, private and multilateral spheres were mainly ill-equipped to appropriately adapt and agilely respond. There were also challenges related to adaptation, particularly capacity for technical, institutional and value chain management and reorientation. These and other factors undermined the capacity of states for effective planning, globally, regionally, and nationally, and posed challenges to the translation of plans into relevant actions. The COVID-19 pandemic has created a temporal separation in how development performance is being assessed globally. Specific to the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica, there is the pre-pandemic era that was characterized by the effects of the 2008 global financial crisis and other shocks up to 2019. And then there is the post-COVID era that commenced in early 2020, with the effects expected to continue throughout the decade ending 2030. Accordingly, performance under Vision 2030 Jamaica can be first assessed up to the end of 2019 and then secondly from 2020 onwards. In some respects, performance up to 2019 can be treated as our pre-COVID baseline. Owing to data availability, the much anticipated monitoring of the early effects of COVID-19 on development progress is not comprehensively treated in this report. Greater focus is given to the pre-COVID situation. The post-COVID situation will be addressed in more detail in subsequent reports. While the measures employed locally to curb the spread of COVID-19 yielded noteworthy positive outcomes, the pandemic negatively impacted development, particularly in the social and economic areas. Jamaica recorded development slippages, and vulnerabilities were exposed. Disruptions in economic activities and key industries stymied economic growth and contributed to loss of jobs and reduced work hours across several industries. Some of the hardest hit industries included hotel and restaurants, and recreational, cultural and sporting activities. The economic linkages among these sectors were also adversely impacted. The medium to long-term impact of the consequent downturn in the economy, higher rate of unemployment, and uptick in inflation will be further examined in subsequent reports. These are likely to have future impact despite signals of recovery that are likely to accelerate. The impact of the pandemic also highlighted risks to achieving effective social protection. The Jamaica Social Protection Strategy 2014 presents a framework for life course social protection for all citizens. Vulnerabilities that had been masked by market continuities, for example those that allowed households to survive on continuous income flows within contexts of inadequate income security, were exposed within the context of the pandemic. There were also institutional vulnerabilities that were masked by social stability and continuities. These included vulnerabilities in families and schools that impacted educational participation during the pandemic. The negative impacts of these vulnerabilities have been demonstrated in not only the development outputs and outcomes that distinguish the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic eras but also the functioning of development-related systems, structures, institutions, and processes. While the pandemic is likely to be one of several global shocks and crises in the decade to 2030, the lessons learned will be utilized in strengthening the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica and the SDGs. Wrap up. Since the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica commenced in 2009, progress towards achieving the national outcomes and their associated targets has been mixed. When measured against the respective medium-term targets set for 2012, 2015, and 2018, most indicators have shown improvement over the baseline year of 2007. However, fluctuations in the performance of indicators, with less than half achieving the respective medium-term targets set for 2012, 2015, and 2018, are indicative of challenges in achieving planned outcomes. The challenges to achieving planned development results have included environmental-related shocks and two global crises, the global financial crisis of 2008 and the COVID-19 global pandemic. The combination of underperformance in key development indicators and contributory factors, including two global crises, have rendered several 2030 targets infeasible in the absence of transformational shifts in geopolitics, global trade and climate-related risks that disproportionately impact small island developing states, SIDS, such as Jamaica. Additionally, Jamaica is still developing its capacity in key areas identified for adaptation and agility in the post-COVID-19 new normal. These areas include technology enablement and sophistication in logistics, supply chain management and resilience in the productive sectors. In the preceding sections, Performance in advancing the national goals and outcomes will be further examined using quantitative and qualitative data. Overview under MTF 2018 to 2021. The medium-term framework to advance Goal 1. 1. Jamaicans are empowered to achieve their fullest potential represented a continuation of programming around the central themes of the 4 national outcomes advanced under previous MTFs. National Outcome Number 1. National Outcome Number 2. National Outcome Number 3. National Outcome Number 4. A healthy and stable population, world-class education and training, effective social protection, authentic and transformational culture. Government policy signaled continued prioritization of developing and facilitating universal access to key public goods and services that were aligned with the national outcomes. These included health care, family planning, and strengthening the regulatory and institutional frameworks for empowering youth and children. There was focus on education and training, support for the development of parenting skills, building social capital in communities, and engaging the citizenry in activities geared towards cultural continuity and preserving Jamaica's tangible and intangible cultural heritage. Also, among the prioritized public goods and services were the strengthening of social insurance, creating a more enabling environment for persons with disabilities, advancing social change towards poverty reduction and wealth building through asset creation and other areas. These public goods and services are considered unexchangeable tenets of the country's toolkit for human capital development, consensus and solidarity, and merit-based social mobility. They were geared towards advancing higher value-added productivity and growth driven by the higher forms of capital: human, knowledge, cultural and institutional. A complementary strategy entailed efforts to strengthen stakeholder capacity to align national development policy and planning with population dynamics and structure. This strategy was intended to promote inclusive, equitable and rights-based universal access to public goods and services, within the context of the implementation of the National Development Plan, NDP. The country's development results were mixed across the four national outcomes of Goal 1. 1. There were development gains in human capital development, including in the areas of population, health, and education. These gains included improvements in life expectancy and educational outcomes related to literacy, among others. The social protection responses to the pandemic included service expansion of social welfare programs to address the needs of both registered and unregistered clients, the provision of social pensions for the elderly, and support to small businesses. There were also gaps in development performance when measured against targets. The evidence showed that the return on investments in key areas were below expectations, and a reimagining of the approach to human capital development and engagement was necessary. The main areas of concern included the quality and equity of access to education and training, healthcare, cultural institutions and services, and social protection. The gaps were augmented by challenges associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, which threatened to undermine development gains and advancements in equity and inclusion. The COVID-19 pandemic was disruptive and impacted program delivery and outcomes across all spheres. This included heightened concerns around access to healthcare and/or disrupted health-seeking practices. Early indications also suggested inequitable and disproportionate losses across structurally advantaged and disadvantaged groups and locales. Synopsis of Development Results 2009/10 2020/21. Development Trends. Jamaica advanced from the intermediate to advanced stage of the demographic transition. The working age population was proportionally the largest age group, thereby reducing the dependency ratio and offering an opportunity to reap a demographic bonus. This was accompanied by a decreasing child population and an increasing elderly population. The population growth rate declined to 0.0 in 2017, and this rate was maintained through to 2020. The rates of morbidity and mortality associated with non-communicable diseases, NCDs, remain a cause for concern. Based on data up to 2015, 1 in 5 Jamaicans is likely to die prematurely before the average age of life expectancy, from one of the main NCDs. Estimates for adult literacy rates have been above 90% since 2011. Total child literacy rates, grade 4, increased to above 80%. When disaggregated by sex, female literacy rate increased to 90%, and the rate for males, though showing an increase, was below 80%. Except for literacy rates, educational participation and outcomes have been performing below target and are a cause for concern. Child numeracy rates and gross enrollment at the tertiary level are among the main areas of underperformance. The national poverty rates were recovering towards the trend decline in the poverty rate up to 2007 after increasing during the heights of the impacts of the 2008 global financial crisis. Main highlights: Jamaica achieved the 2030 target of 0% for the population growth rate. In 2017, Jamaica has had a fairly high adult literacy rate, with estimates showing a 91.7% literacy rate based on latest available data. In 2019, Jamaica recorded a poverty rate of 11.0%, the lowest since 2008. Jamaica has had a fairly high rate for life expectancy at birth prior to and throughout the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica. The total based on the 2011 census is 74.15 years, with female life expectancy at approximately 78 years based on the census data and intercensal estimates. However, while the life expectancy for males is fairly high, it is lower than the baseline 2007. Jamaica continued to rank among countries in the second-tier high human development category on the Human Development Index, HDI. In 2019, Jamaica maintained its 2017 and 2018 HDI value of 0.712. The country's highest score under the HDI was 0.716, recorded in 2012. Overview. Since the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica commenced in 2009. Goal 2. The Jamaican society is secure, cohesive and just has represented the quality of life issues that have been most prioritized in public sentiment. The matters central to the concerns of the citizenry have arguably centered on social cohesion and social capital, good governance and trust, multidimensional justice and ontological security, and the threats to development around these concerns. Also, of the four national goals, Goal 2 deals primarily with empowering the citizenry and other stakeholders and creating an enabling environment for advancing the rights-based approach to development under Vision 2030 Jamaica. The development program for the medium term to advance Goal 2 therefore represented continuity as well as adaptations to a dynamic development environment, in advancing the 21-year strategy for achieving the two national outcomes. National Outcome Number 5. Security and Safety. National Outcome Number 6. Effective Governance. Under National Outcome Number 5. Security and Safety, there has been focus on strengthening the capacity for national and community safety and security and adherence to the rule of law. This has been operationalized through policy and programming for institutional strengthening around the national security apparatus and leveraging technology, intelligence and empowered communities towards crime prevention and management. Policy and programming have also given focus to enabling private and public institutions and mechanisms for the rehabilitation and reintegration of those in conflict with the law, as well as strengthening the governance framework around the private security industry. The issues of cybersecurity, terrorism and border security have been given increasing policy focus within a global context of multi-dimensional threats across and within territorial borders and in the digital and media spaces. For National Outcome Number 6. Effective Governance. The strategy framework has summarily been focused on advancing policy-driven rights-based participatory governance and multidimensional justice. This has been operationalized through strengthening national, local, and organizational institutional capacity for participatory and democratic governance. Specific areas of focus have included improving the effectiveness of government in the delivery of demand-driven public goods and services. These goods and services cover a wide range of areas such as modernized justice services and human rights protections. Improving access to quality and relevant data, statistics, and information within coordinated national systems and governance arrangements have also been prioritized. There has been continued prioritization of inclusion and equity, with mainstreaming gender equality and equity among the main areas being advanced. The establishment of a National Identification System, NIDS, was also advanced towards an improved enabling environment for addressing governance, personal, and commercial identification needs. 1. Synopsis of Development Results FY 2009/10 FY 2020/21. Development Trends Reduction in Serious Crimes Category 1 Crimes 3, including the murder rate to below the values for the baseline year, 2007, 280 per 100,000 population, POP. Although there were fluctuations during the period, the rate of recidivism, reoffense, has been unsatisfactory with medium-term targets not met. However, global trends in recidivism suggest that focus should be placed on preventing entry into crimes, as the lowest reported rates were approximately 1 in F5 offenders, or 20%. Improvement in performance under international governance indicators, particularly government effectiveness. However, there is cause for concern owing to performance below target, fluctuations and slippages for some indicators, and performance below baseline for the Regulatory Quality Index. The case clearance rate showed a trend of improvement, with fluctuations exceeding the 2018 target and moving towards meeting exceeding the 2021 target. Main highlights: the Category 1 crime rate declined to 208.6 per 100,000 population, POP, in 2019 and to 207.29 in 2020, the lowest throughout the period, including the 280 per 100,000 POP recorded in the baseline year 2007. In 2020, the murder rate increased to 48.3 per 100,000 POP from 45.9 in 2019. This was lower than the murder rate of 59.5 per 100,000 POP recorded in the baseline year 2007. The lowest annual murder rate over the period was 36.9 per 100,000 POP recorded in 2014. Footnote: Category 1 crimes were previously referred to as major crimes and include serious violent crimes such as murder, sexual offenses, aggravated assault and robbery. The 2018 target for Government Effectiveness Index of 0.45 was achieved based on a 2017 value of 0.55. The case clearance rate values of 101.6 in 2019 and 96.5 in 2020 exceeded the 2018 and 2021 target of 95. Overview. For the purpose of this report, the progress and gaps in economic development at the end of March 2021, FY 2020/21, will be examined within the context of the ongoing process of development that commenced in 2009, FY 2009/10, with the launch of Vision 2030 Jamaica. Since 2009, the focus of the Government of Jamaica's (GOJ's) economic development policy can be summarily described as creating the structures and systems for economic stability, independence, and growth. Like many other countries, focus has been given to crafting and implementing the appropriate policies to strengthen the economy, limit scarring when faced with external shocks, and lay the foundation for sustained and inclusive economic development. This has required addressing critical structural imbalances, strengthening regulatory and institutional arrangements, and implementing strategic responses to risks associated with the country's vulnerabilities and major threats. Whilst the government has pursued proactive economic development policies and strategies, the compounding effects of two global crises, the 2008 global financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, and the pervasive threats associated with the country's vulnerabilities, have served as roadblocks to economic transformation. One of the fundamental challenges to economic development, in the years immediately following 2009, was macroeconomic instability. This was associated with persistent fiscal deficits, a high debt servicing burden, low international reserves, and high inflation, as well as gaps in the systems and processes for fiscal management and monetary policy frameworks. There was also the consequent insufficiency of resources for public investment and disincentives for private investment towards accelerated growth. Areas of instability in the social and environmental spheres also had an impact on capacity for entrenching economic stability and achieving higher levels of growth. These included not only undesirable rates of crime but also fluctuations in the crime rate owing to the sensitivities of crime and violence to tactical responses within a context where social transformations were deemed necessary to achieve desired long-term results. There was also the ongoing risk of loss and damage from natural disasters. The resulting costs from these social, economic, and environmental factors encompassed the direct costs regarding recovery and the loss of potential earnings due to disincentives to investment. Accordingly, Jamaica's approach to economic development has been characterized by policy-driven systemic and structural transformation of the economy. This integrates both environmental and social development considerations. Further elaboration of the approach to economic development shows the prioritization of macroeconomic stability through fiscal and debt management, tax system reform, targeted monetary policy and strengthening of the financial system, improving government effectiveness through demand-driven performance-based management, strengthening economic infrastructure and the efficiency and security of key productive inputs, such as energy, development of the policy and institutional framework for strengthening the business environment, strengthening Jamaica's global competitiveness through interdependence and cooperation, technology enablement, development of the higher forms of capital as a driver of higher value-added productivity that leverages the country's comparative advantage, initiatives to advance more equitable access to capital, markets, and information towards job creation. Under Vision 2030 Jamaica, the advancement of sustainable, equitable and inclusive economic growth is driven by a paradigm shift that prioritizes the development of the higher forms of capital: human, cultural, institutional, knowledge. These forms of capital are proven drivers of innovation and technological and media expansion. They are indispensable tenets of the toolkit for adaptation and agility in navigating a dynamic global landscape. Globalization presents both opportunities and risks, especially for small island developing states, SIDS, like Jamaica, whose interconnected capacities, resources, and vulnerabilities shape their economic trajectory. The operationalization of the paradigm shift to prioritizing the higher forms of capital has included aligning education and training with labor market demands and entrepreneurship. This has been advanced through science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, STEAM, and technical and vocational education and training, TVET, integration, and development of the National Qualifications Framework, among other areas. The paradigm shift has also included the prioritization of the development of the cultural and creative, knowledge, digital and information economies, and mainstreaming innovation and technology enablement. The higher forms of capital have also been aligned with efforts at achieving complementarities and competitiveness in diversification of the economy. The integration of key social and environmental development factors in the economic development thrust has been demonstrated in policy, planning, institutional strengthening, and programming. This includes the establishment of a Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, MEGJC. The MEGJC's portfolio includes a mix of economic, environmental sustainability and human capital development policy areas. In addition to institutional strengthening, the Cabinet approved GOJ's strategic priorities at the end of the reporting period, including inclusive sustainable economic growth and job creation, which represented an integration of environmental, social and economic policy areas. Also, coherence with the increasing global consensus on the importance of sustainable production and consumption and development financing has been demonstrated through policy-driven programming included in successive MTFs. This has been accompanied by the elevation of the green, blue, and circular economies as critical catalysts for Jamaica's development. Responding to the national and global realities associated with the future of work is important to economic growth and job creation. This particularly relates to malleability and disruption as key tenets of an increasing technology-driven global value chain. These are closely aligned with issues of the permanent stability of work engagements, including considerations around the gig economy. There are local peculiarities to be explored within the Jamaican context that is characterized by pervasive informal spaces and arrangements, including the informal economy. This includes the exploration of considerations around social and income security within the context of informality, the institutionalization of systems and mechanisms to facilitate tactical responses to economic shocks, while maintaining policy focus in advancing long-term goals, is an interwoven feature of the economic development strategy. Within this context, the island's natural vulnerabilities, and limited fiscal space that has impacted state-led development investments, have served as impediments, but not binding constraints. There have been demonstrated gaps in regulatory functions, including shortfalls in meeting timelines to prepare and bring into effect some critical pieces of legislation. However, Jamaica has demonstrated reasonable agility in regulatory policy that require adherence and accountability but allow for adaptation to realities. Synopsis of development results. Development trends. FY 2009/10 FY 2020/21. Debt to GDP ratio on a firm downward trajectory up to 2019. Annual point-to-point inflation rate has been trending downwards. Labor market improvements evidenced by a declining trend in the unemployment rate since 2014 and record employment levels in 2019. However, there were slippages in 2020 owing to the effects of COVID-19. Low growth rates. External shocks have had significant impacts on the country owing to vulnerabilities and have required Jamaica to continuously engage in shock response and recovery over the period of implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica. Reduction in the national prevalence of poverty is likely associated with increases in economic activity that supported improvements in labor market conditions. Main highlights: entrenched macro economic stability. By 2019, public debt fell below 100% of GDP in FY 2018/19 and FY 2019/20 at the end of December 2016. Jamaica's annual inflation rate stood at 1.7%, the lowest inflation rate the country had seen in 45 years in 2019. Record lowest unemployment rate of 7.2%. Average and highest average employment of 1,247,200. Since 1968, the 2018 target of 66 per million population for the number of scientific publications was met, with a value of 85.9 post-COVID-19 declines in 2020 in the performance of key industry structures such as tourism, and demonstrated resilience in agriculture and manufacturing, though to a lesser extent. Overview. Vision 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan (NDP) advances sustainable development that embodies balanced social, economic, and environmental development. Under Goal 4, Jamaica has a healthy natural environment. There are three national outcomes. National Outcome Number 13, National Outcome Number 14, National Outcome Number 15. Sustainable management and use of environmental and natural resources, hazard risk reduction and adaptation to climate change, sustainable urban and rural development. The NDP demonstrates prioritization of environmental sustainability. It covers areas such as natural resources management, hazard risk management and climate change adaptation, and sustainable spatial planning and ecosystems management across rural and urban areas, including the built environment. There has also been continuous improvement in the policy and strategy frameworks for advancing the achievement of Goal 4. This has included increasing representation of the integration of social and economic development processes with that of the environment. Accordingly, the development programs for the respective medium-term periods, since 2009, have been largely focused on strengthening the frameworks, capacity and institutional mechanisms for advancing environmental sustainability relating to the built and natural environment. This has encompassed environmental protection and management, and spatial planning broadly. It also encapsulates the intersections between environmental considerations and household asset creation in areas such as housing and land tenure, strengthening environmental resilience as well as creating the infrastructure and systems to support sustainable consumption and production, and developing a circular economy, have also been prioritized. Jamaica's performance regarding the medium-term targets for the national outcomes under Goal 4 has been mixed. The respective medium-term targets for hazard damage as a percentage of GDP were met. Also, housing quality showed noteworthy improvement, though falling below target. On the other hand, there has been a trend decline in the country's score and ranking under the Environmental Performance Index, EP. Jamaica's performance regarding the development of up-to-date local sustainable development plans, LSDPs, fell below target, and the security of tenure showed little progress towards the targets and remained an area of concern. Synopsis of development results. Some of the main trends and highlights in development performance are presented below. Development trends. There was a downward movement in the rate of rural poverty for 2017 to 2019, when compared with the increases associated with the 2008 global financial crisis. Also, The rate of rural poverty further declined in 2019 to 14.2%, lower than the 2021 target of 16.8%. Progress towards the target for housing quality has been fairly consistent, with values above the baseline 68.1 and falling within the range of the targeted 71-76 for the period 2012 to 2018, with values ranging from 72 to 75. A trend of decline in the EP score with performance below baseline, except for 2016 where there was performance above baseline. This was not sustained in the EP scores for 2018 and 2020. The lowest score was recorded in 2020. The proportion of households with access to secure tenure has been consistently below the value for the baseline year, 2007, and target. The number of parishes with a completed local sustainable development plan, LSDP, that is no older than 5 years has consistently performed below target, while performance has been above the baseline of 0. In 2007, the number of up-to-date LSDPs has not exceeded 5. 2015, main highlights target for hazard damage as a percentage of GDP achieved. Performance under the Housing Quality Index has been consistently above the baseline.